Pete, just tell me again about the cover. You've got all these different elements in it.
The photo that's on the cover is me scrutinising some roll-up film, wondering who had taken the picture and why they had taken it, who was behind the camera.
Something about the way the book runs, it plays with the idea of who is behind the camera, but who is behind the book. It feels like there's lots of different Pete Kalus in the book. You wake up one day and take a certain sort of photograph, and then another day you wake up and take something else.
Yeah. Part of what I was playing with in terms of the many Pete Kalus was trying to write a memoir in such a way that it embraces how other people may have seen me. I think Gertrude Stein did something similar. I was quite interested in invoking other people's opinions and not necessarily flattering opinions either. When I've read standard memoirs, I've felt that people benefit too much from hindsight and they tend to burnish their image a little bit. And so I thought I'd try and do the reverse, allow confusion, allow memories to be discordant or slightly skewed, and also allow for the possibility that people remembering me may not remember me with 100% love and affection. And I wanted to write those more objective angles on myself.
I wanted to ask how you felt when you were writing the book. So from my point of view as a reader, I felt that I was on this helter-skelter of emotional, just smorgasbord of different things. So one minute I'd be, on a bus or something, and I was reading it, and I just couldn't stop myself laughing. It was just so funny. And then the next minute, if I take it with a walk, had it in my pocket, and then I'd get to a chapter and I'd be on a bench and I really would be tearful. So, and there were a lot of different emotions, and I just wondered how it was for you in writing it. How you settled. Was it lots of different feelings?
I did want to write in such a way that it took the whole range of feelings that you can have while on this earth, not just elation, but confusion, despair, puzzlement, joy. Ask myself, how can you represent a person on earth? Not in terms of what they've achieved, but in terms of who they are and the life they've lived, the feelings they've had through the course of their life. And I thought that would be a more useful and in some way more accurate memoir than the standard list of achievements or non-achievements. And so, that was part of what the journey was. How did it feel? Uncomfortable, troubling, sometimes hilarious, of course, but also there emerged, I guess, a tenderness for myself as I was looking back at some of the things that had occurred and that I'd gone through, and a reconciliation. So the book was also an act of kindness to my earlier self, while not being rose tinted, rigorous enough to say, write about it first before you make any judgment. Just try to write it. So that was difficult because you're all at sea. You don't really know, is it working, is it not working, and how it eventually will represent you. But I tried to postpone that figuring out as long as possible. And I still haven't done it, actually.
No, I think that for me, this is the sort of book I can go back to and go, because I was just looking at it just now, and there's that piece about when you're at a meeting around, I think it was around representation, and it was, the representation was not what it should have been at the meeting. And there's a deep sense of irony in a lot of it. And what I love is that it's all peppered around the place. So I think for me, the interesting part of it was that I really haven't come across the way that this is written. I haven't come across this particular genre. I don't know what I call it. But to me, it's about this idea of somehow re-remembering things that you possibly know that every time you remember, it's an active choice. So that's what I felt when I was reading it, that, you know, then some of them, you don't know quite whether this is based on actual reality or whether, you know, there's some bits that maybe you've made up a bit around the memory. And that, to me, is a very exciting way of recalling life, because don't we all do that? And then the other thing that goes with that observation and is that, to me, it's a new sort of form, but there's a lot in here about identity and what it was like growing up for you in Manchester. We've talked a lot around how the form of writing changes. You can change the way that something is represented in order to represent yourself. So do you feel that was deliberate, or did it just happen?
With regard to the element of how a life is lived and what is a true reflection of a life, then yes, the imaginations, the dreams, the nightmares, the what ifs, the alternative lives lived in the imagination as much as the life lived in the factual world, I felt are as much an important part of somebody's soul. Are we allowed to use that word? Their living and their record as what actually happened in their life. I always remember the idea came when I was about 25. I was asked to be a Roman soldier. And I think actually I was asked to come to Hull. Yeah. And there's a photo somewhere of me standing there as a Roman soldier in some museum. and people would come up to me and ask me things. And if I'd done the research well enough, the factual stuff, you know, what did you eat? When did you go to bed? Was it hard carrying the weapons? All this stuff I would answer. But while I was standing there acting as a Roman soldier from Africa, you know, I was imagining what would they have been thinking on a day-to-day level. And I thought nobody would have ever recorded that. They'll record the facts about the boots they wore, the food they ate, the clothes they wore, the treks they made, the people they fought, but not the more whimsical, the more wondrous, the more imagination-inspired musings that they'd have. And I thought that would represent them far better to me than the historian's concatenation of facts. So I was trying in Act Normal to do that for myself. So, as you say, to in that way lead to a different way of writing memoir. So there is a merger of auto-fiction, flash fiction, complete fiction, and then real fact, and then things that I imagine when younger that are as much a fact, you know, because you've imagined them, but sort of the blur between what happened and what I imagined can occur. And so unraveling it all isn't something a reader needs to do. If the reader asks, can I imagine this person from having read the book, then that's the question that I'm posing, you know, and hopefully if the answer is anywhere close to yes, then I've done my job as a writer.
I think that's really valid, and you know, but it's interesting that I'd love to talk to other people about their responses to the book, because I have my own little favourite bits. So the bit where I just went, oh yes, yeah, I think I can't remember exactly what you say, but you say, you know, falling in love. What do you say is what is one of, who would dream that up, you know, as an idea? So that, and it's almost like not the worst thing that can happen to you. I can't remember exactly how you phrased
I remember it. In truth, you know, is who God punishes.
Yes,
they make fall in love.
For me, I just thought it made me laugh so much, because, you know, when people reflect on, often when you read these things and somebody talks about their true love, you know, whatever that true love was, whereas you somehow didn't, that wasn't where you, it was just I thought about, oh, there was something that rang so true about that, well, whoever or whatever it was, it was just the feeling of it, is hard. I think it's a lovely book for people to go, I want to go back into that bit.
Yes, yes.
And for each person, it's going to be a different bit. So I don't know whether that was purposeful, that you designed it like that.
I did want to avoid having a conventional structure. I wrote crime thrillers and they'll build towards this climax and chase, and then will they get shot dead or will they rescue whoever it is that they're rescuing, and will the gold be found? I didn't want to write that kind of classical plot and narrative. Instead, I wanted to attempt to understand how you can enter someone's life in a different way. There's so many different ways in which we are known, and so it's an attempt to create that kaleidoscope.
But I love that in a world where we seem to have all these algorithms making you go one way or the other, that all these things happen concurrently and can all sit together in this space of re-remembering. And I felt that was the strength. And when you launched the book, you mentioned that people were saying to you, can there not be like some sort of timeline here where you begin at the beginning of your life and get to now, because the whole thing jumps around. You're in one space and you're a teenager, and then you're actually a much older person, then you're with children, and then you're a child yourself, and then you go backwards and forwards. So as a reader, you have to be able to be open, I think is the word. So in a way, you've written a book for me which demands something actually of the reader themselves, that they are open to going, oh, the narrative arc isn't either in a timeline or in any shape maybe that there is more recognizable.
Yeah, I think you go through phases in which one element or another element, one time or another time of your life, become prominent. And I did do some reading of neuroscience on how memory works. And one of the things that the neuroscientists were saying is that memory actually has a purpose, and its purpose is for the now. And so, to some extent, the mind serves up the memory that is useful now. And so, taking that as an idea, looking at, for instance, my mother, when she was reaching a grand age, 94, 95, she often retreated to when she was in her 20s or when she was in her teens. And that gave her such joy, such pleasure to remember that some of the hardships, the physical, medical hardships that she was going through seemed to disappear, melt away in that moment.
Yes.
It was a beautiful thing to watch her.
Do you know, that's so resonant for me, because my mother, who I adored, and she died about 15 years ago, she once said to me, because I'd done a lot of travelling and writing and sort of lived 6 months here, and she once sat me down, she said, oh well, Julia, when you get to my age, it'll be great because you'll have plenty for yourself. And so actually, from her perspective, she was moving into that as well. The other thing that I wanted to ask you was, I know that you're a poet as well, so that in writing these chapters, did you feel that it was more akin to working on some of your poems than maybe some of your novels, in the way that you approach the writing?
The format that I was trying to write wasn't poetry, and it wasn't the novels. It was the diary. And the idea was that whatever thought came into my mind, write it down, no matter how grand or trivial, whatever feeling came to me. And in this almost scientific way, try to build a picture of a day in the life almost. But of course, I was writing it over 2 or 3 years. But those 3 years encompass all the memories that came in that time, and all the imaginations, all the dreams, all the configurations in that time. Map them without any artifice, without any attempt at capital P poetry. And then afterwards, the craft. This is too long, let us shorten it. And in shortening it, we can actually get a few rhythms going within the text,
Yeah.
get a few storylines moving within the text in that microcosm of a 200, 300 word passage. The crafting probably came afterwards. At first, I was really just attempting to put it down and leave it.
So this intrigues me because just in terms of, so you have all these, I can't remember how many sections there are, but I'm just imagining, because when I do this sort of thing, you say that you shouldn't waste with print. How did you assemble it in its final shape?
It was tricky. I didn't really know how I was going to assemble it. There are over 260 sections. It was a matter of throwing everything like on this floor here and then just moving it around and looking in almost a musical or visual arts way, saying, does this work next to that? And if this works next to that, then what would follow it maybe? And how would that pattern work out throughout the text? And every time I got to a point where I thought, okay, this sits well, then I'd kind of crystallize it and say, okay, let's hold that and now let's see what we'll do. There was very much not absolutely having a map, a plan, an overarching scheme. Towards the end, I wanted that sense of something becoming slightly more serious. And so the frivolity and the joy, it is there at the end, because even in the midst of difficult moments, there is a gallows humour sometimes. But I did decide to put the longer pieces relating to my father's death towards the end to give it a sense of coda, of ending, even if the ending was not my life, but my father's. But outside of that, it's very much intuited. You can actually start reading it in the middle and go backwards to the beginning, or read in the middle, go towards the end.
I have a final question for you, Pete. Have you got a favourite bit yourself of this book? This is really hard, because I know when people say, oh, well, authors always have their favourite little bit and they think it's the best, and maybe it isn't, and they often start with that. And when editors will say, well, that's not the strongest bit, but it would just interest me to know if you do have a favourite bit, and if you do, would you read it? But if you don't, that's fine. And does it maybe that it changes anyway?
Well, because of the way in which this interview began, my favourite in this moment was something that a writer friend actually did say to me, and it relates to what you were talking about, the falling in love. When you have that heartache the first time, everyone listens. When you have it the second time, they listen, but not that attentively.
Yes.
And then by the third time, they're just waiting for you to finish your sentence and then going to move on. And there is a section there, memory, of how that occurred to me.
Yes.
And I was even though I was the one heartbroken, I was with my friends thinking, you know what, Pete?
It's happened. That's a really good, I think that's a really lovely way to sort of finish it. I would just say that it's just hugely enjoyable. And for me, I felt like I was watching a film. And I'm not quite sure why that is, because although it's about a life, I felt that there was a lot of landscape in there, that I was sort of moving in and panning in and out of a life.
Yes, absolutely.
And it was set very much around Manchester, which I know well, but also other spaces. And there was sometimes you were up against, like you could see like the wall in the street, and then other times you could almost see like the whole, like you were almost like landing in, coming down from, through to Manchester, into Manchester Airport, and you would see the city, and it's complete, and then you in it, but in these different perspectives. So I don't know whether you were trying to do that deliberately, but that's very much, to me, it was a very filmic experience.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense too. That I didn't intend it, but as you imagined it, I could join you in that imagination and see that it's definitely a technique that I've used, that zoom in and sometimes zoom right out. Sometimes it's more polemical, which is the zoom out. Sometimes it's intensely memoir based, which is the very close up. Often the camera's on my shoulder, but sometimes the camera shoots to the other side of the room and is watching me as someone else. And so that's a great image,
Yeah, well, thank you, Pete. It's been lovely talking about it.
My pleasure. Thank you.